thank you guys for being here. Today we have Acting Comptroller Hood, who has been leading when it comes to the administration's approach to digital assets and has been leading when it comes to teaching his colleagues about all the innovative capacities of blockchain technology. And so thank you again for being with us today. And for the folks who don't know you and don't know your background and don't know about your interest in digital assets, can you briefly describe your background and your prioritization when it comes to digital assets?
Yes, well, first and foremost, everyone, I am delighted to be with you all this afternoon. Taylor, thank you for moderating our fireside chat. For those of you who don't know me, I am Rodney Hood. I have been in financial services for the better part of 30 years. I did take a rather circuitous route to get here. I was an accounting intern at Arthur Andersen, if you remember that firm, during high school and college. Did a missionary assignment in Africa, eschewed the priesthood to become a banker, where I've worked in and around finance for 30 years. A lot of the activities that I've done in finance has always been around economic development, commercial lending, urban renewal, all the things that I think that is important to really strengthening the communities that we live in. And though I mentioned eschewing the priesthood, the work that I do in finance still allows me to do those types of activities, and that is making the society we live a better place. With that being said, I've worked with a number of the large banks on Wall Street. I've also regulated America's credit union system, and I now today, Taylor, get to oversee America's banking system as the acting comptroller of the currency. OCC oversees 1,040 banks, roughly 16 trillion in assets, and since I have been coming to work for the past 5 weeks, I get to be reminded of Abraham Lincoln every day, because it was Abraham Lincoln who created our agency in 1863 through the National Currency Act, through the National Banking Act, and I also credit Abraham Lincoln for some of the things that I care about, and that is, he said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. I'm creating a bright future for banks in America to use digital assets, for them to really recognize that with the number of folks who really need innovation to have access to the financial system, digital assets is a way of doing that. Other priorities that I have, Taylor, include financial inclusion. You all, I believe that financial inclusion is indeed the civil rights issue of our generation. 40% of households are unable to obtain $400 in an emergency. We still have a number of individuals with what we would call credit invisible. Digital assets and financial technology can bridge that gap. With that being said, financial technology and bank partnerships, I believe it's important that we use today's emerging technologies to not just go deeper with our customers and our clients, but how do we use data to not just meet needs, but to anticipate needs? So you're seeing a number of activities that we will soon discuss, Taylor, emanating from the OCC that shows our support of digital assets and digitalization in America's banking system. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that in order for me to do any of this, I cannot do any of this unilaterally. David Stankiewicz is here from my team. David is the gentleman who's from the OCC Office of Financial Technology. I am really delighted that he is here. Another piece of what we're working on, we have just approved the first national bank fintech bank charter. So that's SmartBiz. That is a national bank that is now going to adopt a fintech model. So those are the types of things in a nutshell that I'm working on through my regulatory priorities at the OCC.
Right, and there's a lot there, a lot of ground to lay. So earlier this month, the OCC issued interpretive letter 1183, which I think a lot of us saw on Twitter and a lot, surrounding the industry, which seek to provide that regulatory clarity and remove a lot of those burdens that our industry was facing. Can you just kind of describe kind of the letter, what the purpose was, and what should the audience take away kind of about the issuance of the letter? What was the point of it? What was the purpose?
Exactly. Many of you who probably traveled from near and far are like, why is there so much excitement about a simple letter? Well, you all, what 1183 did is replace interpretive letter 1179. What I was able to do with a lot of my colleagues at the OCC and recognizing that the current administration is really excited about cryptocurrency and digital, 1183, the letter you all, it removes a lot of the impediments that used to exist. It now has provided banks, like many of you in this room, with the regulatory clarity that they can engage with cryptocurrency, digital assets either through custody, they can engage with distributed ledger technologies, they can use these emerging technologies daily now. Before that, it was what we would call a no objection, where you could come to our organization, that being the OCC, and you wouldn't get a yes, but you would get a non-objection. What kind of world is that? For the gentleman in the room, how would you like to go about your dating lives? And where you're going to maybe ask her out, but you don't know if she's not going to object. So would you be inclined to object if I asked you out? So I have removed the sword of Damocles dangling over the heads of the financial industry by making it possible, again, 1183, opening doors, giving you regulatory clarity. But Taylor, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that that is an iterative process. You're going to be seeing other activities. It's not, okay, we've given you a new letter, now be fruitful and multiply. No, you're going to see guidance. You're going to see us doing things with de novo institutions. That Smart Biz event that I just mentioned, I'm hoping to see more activities such as that. So that was my way of signaling to all of you that there is a new day, and that new day is all about digital and giving 21st century solutions and products to all of our banks and local communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of folks in the room constantly hear about the path to regulatory clarity and providing rules of the road. And this is what that actually looks like. This is us stepping up to the plate and providing that guidance. So
it is.
We all in the industry, thank you for that. We have seen the damaging effect of that, and we have also seen now the light at the end of the tunnel. So we appreciate you for all that you've done on that.
Well, you're so right, Taylor, and thank you for saying that. And again, you all, one of my philosophies around financial regulation, and I'm a safety and soundness guy. I have 1,040 banks that I'm keeping safe, but at the end of the day, it's about regulation being effective and not excessive, and it's also about me giving you the framework. So I still have a fidelity to safety, consumer protection, consumer compliance, but I don't want it to be so at the detriment of your ability to take on these new products. And another saying, it's about risk management and not risk avoidance.
Right, no, that's a fantastic way to put it. So switching gears a little bit, to support innovation, you mentioned OCC is kind of utilizing sandboxes. Can you talk a little bit more about that and provide a little bit more color and kind of what is the benefit to OCC participating in sort of a sandbox or having the banking community engaging with the regulators in that way?
The importance, you all, of a regulatory sandbox is, for me, it provides a pathway for us at the OCC to learn more about what some of the fintechs are doing. How do we use some borrowings from our regulatory peers from the United Kingdom, the Financial Conduct Authority? I credit them with really giving a lot of guidance around sandboxes. In fact, I'll be traveling there in a few weeks to go not only meet with them, but to see if I can perhaps entice one of their leaders to come back and help us as we explore more regulatory sandboxes. You know, in a nutshell, it provides us with a regulatory framework where you can work with that fintech, look at the product, look at the solution, but let's see how do we work out the regulatory impediments before it goes live, before it goes to market. I think in many instances you will have a fintech with a wonderful idea, but when it goes to market it's fraught often with compliance issues. Let's have a controlled environment where the regulator and the fintech and possibly the bank are all working in agreement to see what are the issues and how do we maybe get it to really be deployed. That's whether it's payment processing, whether it's about data aggregation. I'd love to see us bring a sandbox to the agency, and we're working to do that soon. Another thing, Taylor, we're going to be looking at doing tech sprints. How do we bring bright, motivated individuals like many of you here to help us have some solutions? I know I'd like to have some fintech solutions around financial inclusion, maybe some around data and how do you use data to open the credit aperture. Those are some of the things that you're going to see us doing. Don't know, show of hands, how many of you in the room are fintechs yourselves and fintech providers? We are going to be, May 6th through 8th, the OCC is going to be doing fintech office hours. That's an opportunity for banks and fintechs to come and meet with people like Dave Stinkowitz and the Office of Technology. You're going to give your ideas and get questions and maybe get a feel for what are some of the things that the OCC cares about when it comes to looking at partnerships. So we will be doing office hours May 6th through the 8th. I would encourage you to go to the OCC website so that you can apply. And these will be 50-minute sessions where you're talking candidly and openly about what your technological activities of the future will be and how you can get that regulatory pathway. I mentioned going over to London in a few weeks. I'll also be hoping to see a lot of folks from GFIN. I don't know if any of you have worked with the Global Financial Innovation Network, but again, we can only be as productive in our American framework if we are learning from other players in the industry. And I think if there's one thing I'd note, is that the OCC works with a lot of our financial counterparts throughout the globe. And I'm all about working in partnership because I think the more we learn and partner with others, the better and stronger I think that our system here will become. So look forward to sharing out with you maybe at next year's blockchain event about what have some of the successes been from my time in the UK and also with our sandbox.
And so zooming in a little bit to community banks, these obviously provide critical services to local communities. And this is the backbone a lot of times for these communities. And they're now looking to use emerging technology. And so what do you think kind of the biggest challenge is for these community banks in utilizing blockchain technology or, working with the OCC to address all of these up and coming challenges of an increasingly digital age? What are the kind of the big pressing issues that these community banks are raising to you?
Well, I think one of the pressing issues at the time being is that they've not really had community bankers. They've had the regulatory clarity. They've never had sort of like the imprimatur that they can even look at these types of advancements. So I think, one, we've removed that barrier or that uncertainty. I think another piece, when you're looking to advance a lot of the technologies there still needs to be a core service provider. So how do you make sure that you're working with your core provider, and especially, Taylor, the smaller community banks, they often have challenges in navigating and renegotiating contracts. So how do we really work with some of the core service providers around having them engaged with the community banks and their thirst or quest for using the tools for financial inclusion and all the things that I've just mentioned? I think another piece that is going to be important is just for there to be this continued dialogue. I think that there are a number of folks who are still a little, I wouldn't say afraid, but they still are wondering, how do they bring in digital platforms, digital assets, use of distributed ledger technologies? How do they do it safely and soundly? And I think the way we best do that is by highlighting use cases, talking about some of the success stories, and I think one of the other things, I think, is about partnerships. I think that is the one thing that really allows the community banks is knowing that there are other partners out there. I think pre-COVID, a lot of the individuals would probably have looked at the fintech providers as a threat to the banking system. I now look at it as an addition. I look at it as an opportunity to help scale and grow. So I think the partnership models are there, and I hope that recent announcement that we did with the National Bank and the FinTech Charter, I think we're going to see other opportunities such as that. So I would encourage just any of the banks that are thinking about this to either come speak with us about our office hours or, but just do the research, but do know that at the OCC, regulatory framework, regulatory clarity, and we certainly want them to use these tools wisely.
Absolutely. And you said something really interesting in your opening remarks about financial inclusion and how that's kind of the biggest civil rights issue of our time. OCC has been a leader in this area. You have been a leader in this area through operations like Project Reach or other things that the OCC has been doing. So what is your vision for how OCC can continue that fight and can continue to make financial inclusion accessible?
That's a really good question, Taylor. I think the main thing we can do in that space around financial inclusion, again, as the civil rights issue of our time, is to lead by example. I am very proud of the fact that at the OCC, we have an initiative called REACH. That's the Roundtable for Economic Access and Change. That is around providing community leaders, community banks, and even Wall Street banks with a platform for discussing the issues of the day around bringing small dollar loans to our communities in need, around looking for opportunities to lend when there may not be a viable credit score. How do you use cash flow analysis and cash flow lending to approve loans? At the OCC, there are convenings that REACH has been doing for the past 5 years. We will be having our next REACH conference in New York on April the 29th. So if any of you are in New York, I'd love for you to maybe come to our convening for REACH. And that has national civil rights leaders on the council for REACH, as well as a lot of the banks as well. So it's a wonderful, robust dialogue that we will be having there. I think another thing that I would talk about, I know, Taylor, you asked me about the OCC. I don't know if you know this, but because of my role as acting comptroller, which, by the way, acting doesn't mean inactive. I really am staying pretty busy. I also have a seat on the board of the FDIC. And I want you to know that they also are really actively engaged with financial inclusion and financial education and literacy. So one of the things I'm doing with them is making sure that there are continuing to be workshops and outreach sessions, again, strengthening the tools that are out there. I still think that financial education is something that we need to champion, and I just want you to know that not only is the OCC looking at things such as REACH, but the FDIC is also a huge advocate for the issues around bringing the underserved into the financial mainstream. One of the things that I want to share, and the reason I talk about financial inclusion, because without it, you can't have the car loan that you need to get the car to go to and from work. You can't get that, not even a mortgage, but you can't even get an apartment rental in some instances. And you can't, in some instances, get jobs because many companies are requiring credit scores. So that is why I talk so passionately about financial inclusion, because without it, you're leaving people vulnerable to pernicious predatory payday lenders.
Absolutely. And our time is just about up now, but I wanted you, in our last moments, to kind of take us inside of these kind of conversations that you've been having at a high level. Just to follow up here, what have they been like? How have you seen, the sea change? Is it still you're, educating folks, being a professor to your colleagues and, getting folks up to 101? Or have you said to yourself, people are starting to really get it and I don't have to spend all this time teaching everybody just to get up to speed?
It's an iterative process, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. Yours truly, before I get on the Peloton in the morning, I am listening to podcasts, either from what's going on in Singapore, what's going on in London. So we're all learning together. I think the fact that you even look around the room here today, I went to this conference probably a decade ago, and we probably could have gotten everyone here in this main area. So the fact that you're seeing thousands of folks at a conference like this means that there's been a lot of support galvanizing around it. I think the financial regulators, I think definitely with the incoming folks that I see coming into the SEC, the CFTC, my agency, we all are in alignment that digital assets are the way of the future, and we certainly want America to lead in the space. I think the technology, I think the expertise is there, so it's continuing to learn. I don't want anyone to ever be so arrogant to think that they have all the answers, but I'm continuing to learn. I know we're all asking questions, and that's, again, why I love convening such as this. Again, when I cross the pond, I'm going to be meeting with those thought leaders, so it's ongoing, but I think the one thing that gives me great solace is that there is a regulatory regime that really is moving this forward. I don't think that you would see the excitement and the I don't know about how everyone would be so sanguine about the future of this if it weren't for the regulators. Yeah. But the fact that we are in alignment, the fact that we are empowering everyone to move forward, I think it's a bright day. I don't think there's ever been a brighter opportunity for digital platforms and optimal use cases.
Well, we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.